to. There we go. So welcome everybody to this episode of the Inclusion Conversation. As most of you know, my name is Solène Anglaret and I'm the host of the Inclusion Conversation. I'm also the founder of Be Beyond Borders and an author as well. I started the Inclusion Conversation because I really wanted to bring people together from different backgrounds, from different parts of the world, and have open-ended conversations where we learn from each other and we connect and we really bring the world closer together. So I'm so happy to be here with you this morning, and this is going to be what's going to be happening in the next hour. So first half hour, we're going to be having a conversation with our guests around the topic of who am I? Who are you? Identity and intersectionality, and we have 3 guests and I'm really looking forward to hearing from them. So very, very soon we're going to be introducing them, and then the second half hour we're going to stop the recording and we're going to have an open-ended conversation where you can share also your personal story and your personal views on this topic. So I'm really looking forward to the next hour with all of you. And before we get started, before I remind you of the flow and all of that, I just want to ask you to reflect, because I like to start these a little bit differently, as you know. And so the first reflection is if you can think of 3 words that you would use to answer the question, who are you? And just pop them into the chat. If you're watching the recording, write them down on the paper, write them down in your phone. But if you're here live, and if you're comfortable to do that, just have a think, 3 words that you would answer, who are you? And pop them into the chat. As a reminder, the Inclusion Conversation etiquette. So as I said, we are recording the first half. Cameras on if you're comfortable. It's lovely to see you. We are having the subtitles on, so I hope you can see them. If there's any issues with that, just let me know. You can use the chat at any point in time to ask questions, to tell us a bit more about you, or to react to what is being said. In terms of mindset, this is a safe space. It's all about learning from each other. So we encourage kindness and open-ended questions and just openness in general. And then there are no breaks planned in the next hour. If you need a break, just take it. That's okay. You don't need to raise your hand. All good. So that's it for me for the introduction, and I'm so happy to be joined by 3 amazing guests, and they are in the same room, which is incredible. They're joining us from Hong Kong. We've got Benita, Sudesh, and Fern. So all 3 of you, and starting with you, Benita, would you like to answer the question? Who are you?
So hi, I'm Benita. In the Facebook, I use this term to describe myself. I'm a passionate human being. I'm very passionate about what I love to do. I'm a scuba diver instructor. I've been teaching for many years. I'm also a LGBT advocate. So in the last few years in Hong Kong, I have been starting the LGBT city tour and doing other works. I also teach. I'm very passionate about other DEI topic as well, including differently abled or ethnic minority. So with my work with Encompass and diving, I've been also reaching out to differently abled individuals. One last point: I'm an individual living with bipolar disorder, and I'm trying to come into terms with the identity recently. Yeah.
Thank you. Thanks so much. Fern, what about you? Who are you?
Sure. Well, I definitely cannot just use 3 words, probably 30 words, okay? So I'm a mom of 2. I'm a wife, a daughter, a sister. I'm a first-generation CBC, Canadian-born Chinese, who's made Hong Kong my home for the last 35 years. I'm a board director, an advisor, a mentor, a passionate LGBT plus ally, and also a DEI advocate, also very passionate about that as well.
Great. I think the word passion is coming from everyone, so I'm loving it. Sudesh, what about you? Who are you?
Oh boy. So dad of 2, Malaysian born of Indian origin, and I've never been to India. Living in Hong Kong for the past 15 years, and I speak Chinese, and you will never know. And even sometimes I don't even know myself what I can or cannot do, but it is all about hidden, invisible things that we always own, and my job is to basically break that ice, break that understanding and of perception, remove that bias. And I run DEI for Manulife Asia.
Amazing, thank you. We'll go in reverse order, and we'll just ask you, reflecting on what made you decide to introduce certain things about yourself and maybe not others in this initial part of the conversation. Sudesh.
I don't know. Sometimes it's a tough question, don't you think? When people ask you, tell me about yourself, you will just say the usual things. That's what's on your LinkedIn profile, for example. You don't say the other things that is hidden because you're not sure whether people would want to know, or if they would be interested to know, or would they think of you differently if you tell them. Like when Benita mentioned that I have bipolar disorder, would people look at her differently and have a different perception of the person? So we always wear an armor. I always wear an armor just to protect myself. That is a way of keeping it hidden.
So Sudesh, now that we know you speak Chinese, we can't talk about you anymore.
You cannot.
Also, are you just realizing now that Sudesh has been understanding everything about him?
So he's been hearing lots of things that we've been saying about him. Okay, all right. But we're still friends, so it's all good. It's all good. So for me, I just wanted to focus on my strengths and the things that I love to do, and also things that are important to me now and in the future. I actually thought of saying that I'm a retiree, and I'm a pretty old person, but I was thinking, is that going to give people the impression that I'm past my sell-by date and I don't have the drive and energy to, change the world, which hopefully is not true.
Nope, not true.
Fern is, I think, definitely more than a retiree. She's doing so many things. I don't know, where she gets her energy in doing so many things. So I'm always very impressed with Fern.
Busy retiree.
And as for myself, this scuba diving and DI identity for me has been for a long while. But I have, and I know Brian is in the room. Brian Henderson here encouraged me to come out with my own bipolar identity. I was a little bit afraid, as Sudesh was saying before, about disclosing that part of myself, because I think there's still a lot of stereotype and judgment in Hong Kong about mental health. But I think as a DI advocate, I want to be my authentic self and telling people that this is one of the struggles I meet in my daily life. Yeah.
Yeah, it's really interesting to reflect because, like you said, we get asked a lot, tell me about yourself, especially in interviews, right? Like job interviews. It's like, tell me about yourself. And I always find it a really difficult question, because it's like, how much do you want to know? How much time do you have? And how deep do you go as well? And it's interesting because we just answer it and we just do it almost on the spot. But then to take that moment to reflect, hang on a minute, how come did I decide to talk about this part with this person and not that person? And then it comes down to trust, doesn't it, as well? So yeah, very, very interesting topic. And I can see in the chat that people are also struggling with the free words, right? Really hard to kind of use free words to describe ourselves. And people are going in different, very different directions. We've got Christy saying a citizen of the world. We've got Charmini saying daughter, mum of a fur baby and wife. Philippe is Philippe male and French. So some people are going, more for values. Rachel wrote creative, positive, and caring. So some people are going more for facts. Some people are going more for values. Some people are going for a mix of the two. So yeah, it's really interesting. And I think it's great once you've answered in the chat now to reflect on, what made me in that moment decide on these words and perhaps not other words? Because free words, let's be honest, is not enough. And we're going to now ask you a little bit of a related question, a little bit different, a little bit of a tricky one. It's one that I always ask myself. It's about boxes, because the words that we use to describe ourselves, a lot of the time, they can be seen as boxes. And we wouldn't necessarily like other people to put us in those boxes. Like for me, if someone say, oh, Solène, she's French, and I'd be like, well, yeah, but like I've lived abroad and I've done da 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 da, So what do you think about boxes? Do you like them? Do you think we need them? Do you think you really don't like them? Like, what do you make of it? And I'll come to you, Sudesh, first on that.
It's like, give the tough one to this fellow. Boxes are good and bad. Some places you need to have boxes. For example, in an actuary function, you need to have actuaries in an actuary function, and then you put them into the actuary box. You can't have a free thinker into an actuary function. The company will lose money. So certain things you'll have to put into boxes, into certain roles. But when it comes to humanity and persons, because we are animals of identity, what we see. What we see, we judge immediately. Okay, you look like this, you smell like this, you speak like this, you must come from here. Certain accents. Accents are the worst kinds, if you think about it. You may look one kind, but if you speak a different accent, oh, you're from here. Oh, you're from there. Immediately, your socioeconomic standards will go either up or down. Speak with a British accent, you are the top of the class. Speak with English of the highest degree from a rural village in Pakistan, you are no better than anybody else. It's still the same language, it's still English, but just because you're speaking with a different accent. So where do you put boxes here? And boxes are the worst kind of bias, I feel. And you just immediately define the person. I've been put in many boxes. You look at this fellow Indian, he must be a drunkard. He must be a wife beater. Many a times when we sit, I've been in trains in Hong Kong, nobody will sit next to me on the train because they assume that I'm smelly. I use good perfume, I tell you. and these are boxes, these are perceptions that people immediately judge you because of what they know of you. Mm-hmm. So I think this is the role that we need to play as DI advocates in terms of we need to create awareness and education. Keep teaching people, educate, aware. No, these boxes are not real, it doesn't exist. Let's talk about another part of this person. I also am a Lego enthusiast. I build Lego as a hobby. But nobody knows that either.
Yes,
I didn't know that.
It's a very profitable hobby, I understand, right?
Very, very.
Sitting on millions of dollars of Lego pieces and stuff.
What do you think about that, Benita, Fern? Do you agree with what Sudesh said? Disagree?
I think sometimes boxes are helpful for us to understand certain things. So for the gender diversity, like LGBT, there are different labels. In Hong Kong, for the lesbian world, for example, there's TBG, which stands for tomboy, tomboy girl, and then you have pure and no label. I actually wrote an article earlier in Medium. If any of you are interested, just Google why no label should be the only label. It's like we because like we shouldn't define somebody's like sexual orientation or gender expression in a certain thing. But I think especially in the LGBT world, some people use like bisexual, intersex, or genderqueer, a lot of things to try to understand certain thing. But I think sometimes they are helpful, but sometimes they might just not represent the whole spectrum. So I think it's maybe like a necessary evil. Sometimes we should do that, but sometimes it might not explain the whole uniqueness of people. And I think Fern has.
I mean, I think if we focus on the labels, we are going to miss the sort of multifaceted richness and nuances of who people really are. If you think of, in the business sense, if you're recruiting somebody or you're trying to hire somebody, you should be selecting based on skills, experience, capabilities, the person's ambition, their personality. It's not about ticking boxes, because if you just do that, you're going to probably hire the wrong people.
And that's a really interesting, actually, transition point that you're making there around recognizing that people are more than just one box or one identity, and that we all live across a variety of boxes. And so within our identity, there's a lot of diversity. And that's where the term intersectionality comes in. So Fern, coming back to you, can you tell us a bit more about intersectionality? Because I think a lot of people don't necessarily know what it means or where it comes from.
Sure. I mean, in the last maybe 5 years, you've heard of this term a lot, but it's actually been coined over 30 years ago by the American legal scholar Kimberly Crenshaw, she saw that racism and sexism combined and compounded the discrimination that Black women face in a number of legal cases. And so these legal cases couldn't be classified as either sexist or racist. So she saw this, unique type of discrimination that was being played out with these cases. So I think, if you look at intersectionality, we all have these multiple characteristics and identities that both converge and interconnect. And they have an impact on how we interact with people socially, but also on how we live our lives. So, and if you think of say, what we face individually, either we talk about discrimination or even privileges that some of us may have, these concepts are rarely single dimensional. They are usually multidimensional.
Yeah, that's
Did
so
you want to
true.
add
And I
something to
see
that?
that Jordi put in the chat that through conversations that she's had, some people find comfort in boxes as a place of belonging. And I think it's really interesting to put that in perspective with what you've just said. So, so yes, indeed, it's really empowering to own the fact that you identify with a certain group and a certain community, because it creates that sense of belonging. And yet at the same time being recognized for that intersectional being that sits across lots of different identities that make us unique and human at the same time. This kind of dialectic, two things that may seem opposite, but actually can live at the same time in the same place together.
Solid, it's
so,
very hard
yes.
if you think about it, right? I wanted to just interject. It's
Of
very
course.
hard to being an intersectional person.
Yes.
Because sometimes you feel that you don't belong anywhere.
Yes.
It's tough. If you're like you may have a disability, sexual orientation, have a different race, have a different gender, but can you identify yourself completely as LGBT? Not also, and even the community will also feel that you're not really like us. You are mixed around everywhere, and it's actually quite hard. I feel personally also to be that way. So we always seek comfort. We seek comfort where it is safe. So we go back to those boxes. Whether you go back to those boxes of people that we are comfortable and feel safe with because they look like you. And that is where you start hiding all your other intersectional values because they feel safer. But that is not your true you. I don't know. What do you think?
I can definitely relate to that. The feeling that you belong everywhere and at the same time you belong nowhere. Because you belong to humanity, especially I think when you travel and you move to different places and you live in different countries, you become this citizen of the world and you can create that sense of familiar and that sense of comfort and routine almost anywhere. And at the same time, you're never really part of what's going on around you. And you're really aware that you're not 100% a member of that country, that community, that culture. Yes, that really resonates. Benita, Fern, any thoughts on that?
I think especially maybe in the LGBT community, there's a lot of different labels, like within the lesbian group, for example, there's different groups. And it's sometimes I think it's hard to be like Sudesh say, be intersectional, and people just assume that if you're bisexual, then you must be a certain way. If you're a tomboy, you must be a certain way, and they don't understand your unique challenges. For example, now when I introduce myself to other people, I would say maybe I'm a lesbian with bipolar disorder, and that's I will show we are multidimensional. And I think one of the exercises I like to do when I do a workshop is for people to look at their own privilege and identity. So I think this intersection identity. So maybe Sudesh being a Malaysian Indian speaking Chinese, maybe have certain advantage because not every Malaysian Indian speak Chinese, so that might give him certain privilege and certain way. So I also like to do this exercise called identity map. I don't know if any of you have done it. You can use a piece of paper and write down what identities are important to you, maybe your gender, your sexual orientation, your religious, and I think that's a good way of understanding your own intersectional identity and personal growth as well. Yeah.
Yeah, I think therein lies a challenge for companies So up until fairly recently, companies have been focusing on, specific areas of diversity like gender, disability, etc. And, now, with the recognition of intersectionality, companies are starting to evolve into taking a more intersectional approach. And so what that means is, when you're introducing initiatives, like say, for example, you want to focus on gender, which a lot of companies do, and you introduce initiatives for working mothers. So if that's your focus, I think it's great, but then you may be neglecting maybe women who have elder care responsibilities, women from the LGBT community, women with disabilities, etc. So it's important that you look at a wider spectrum and you try to, understand more about the people across that spectrum and take measures to, not just support, a certain group of them, but the ones that are more disadvantaged within that group.
Yeah, I think you touch on a really interesting point here, because a lot of companies have these employee networks, employee resource groups, there's different names for them. And usually they're centered around one aspect of identity. So you might have a gender and sex group, you might have a race and ethnicity group, you might have a disability group, etc., etc. And I guess the question for me is that helpful? Or how about if we shifted it and we had a belonging group and an inclusion group? And do you see where I'm going? Any thoughts on that?
I personally, I think it's maybe more difficult to implement in the in the company, because people, if you say gender or disability or LGBT, maybe people easily can relate. Belonging and inclusion, those are values, and I think it will take more time because they're more abstract for people to get buy-in. But maybe that's the future of DEI, that we can talk about inclusion, talk about equity instead of just like a women resource group. So I think definitely the DEI in the corporate world has been evolving. I think Fern will know this. I think maybe 5-10 years ago, company only looking at more one-dimensional of diversity, but now more and more companies are looking at multi-dimensional disability. Yeah, no, I'll give Sudesh.
Similar. So we like most other companies, we have those designated ERGs specific to one spectrum of diversity, and we have started to combine them now into DEI councils. So rather than having standalone ERGs, so companies and countries now have a council where you have multifaceted representation in a group who take care of all spectrums of inclusion. So we have been actively rolling that out. We have been rolling out the understanding of intersectionality over the past year. So employees are getting more familiar. So we are starting to see that happen quite organically now. That people are becoming a bit more comfortable with the concept of intersectionality, that we are all different, but we are all the same. And that concept of, and our tagline for DEI in the company is until each one of us belong. So, and we live by that tagline, and it's working. It's definitely working, that people are moving away from being defined into a box that is only the disability group, but they are now going towards the DEI council route.
And for everyone's benefit, so ERGs, employee resource groups, and DEI is diversity, equality, and inclusion. It's great to see that you're experimenting with that shift. I normally don't share my opinion on here, but let's do it. I definitely think that's where the future of diversity and inclusion is headed. So yeah, great to hear that. And taking now a step back and kind of like a bigger picture view, and I'm going to come to you, Fern, with this one to start with. How can we truly create an inclusive world at individual, at organization, and then at society level? What are your thoughts? I mean, it's huge.
Sure. Yes, good question. Okay, so first, at an individual level. So no matter where we are in an organizational hierarchy, no matter where we are in our personal lives and our social circles, we should embrace our own identity and live our authentic selves. I think with some of us, it's easier. And we know that, some people, especially the LGBT community, some people are not out. So that might be more of a challenge. But, if you can't, I don't think you can be truly happy until you are living, in a, your authentic life. You also need to be treating others with kindness, as you mentioned, Selene, dignity and respect, how you expect others to treat you. I think it's important to understand our own biases, unconscious or conscious, and take steps to mitigate them. I think it's also important to ask for feedback, to take feedback and ask for feedback on how I can become more inclusive. I think it's important to learn about other communities and not make assumptions and not be judgmental, ask questions. And, you can be a much better citizen of the world if you do all those things. At an organizational level, I always urge companies to take both a top-down and a bottom-up approach. So I feel it's important to have a DEI strategy with a roadmap that takes you from where you are now to where you would like to be. And this is an important pillar of a company's ESG agenda. And here we're not talking about compliance, because I think there's been lots of research talking about the benefits of DE&I in terms of greater employee engagement, better innovation, creativity, and so on. If you really want to create an inclusive workplace, you need policies, training, KPIs, you need organization structures, you need lots of things like that help to create that inclusive culture within the company for your employees. But the other aspect that companies are starting to wake up to is it's not just about what's happening inside the company, but it's all your touch points and interactions with external stakeholders, be it clients, customers, vendors, suppliers, partners. So it's not just inclusion internally, but also, how you interact with others. I think it's important to understand the diversity of your workplace, to keep measuring it and seeing how it changes, because that tells you a lot of information about whether you're doing the right thing. And I mentioned about bottom up. You need to listen to your employees. You need to actively ask for feedback, and you need to empower them to set up ERGs or, whatever, take on activities that align with your agenda. So it's not just top down. And of course, leaders need to walk the talk and be accountable for driving that DEI agenda. I'm going to stop there, and then let's talk about society level a bit later, because I think there's a lot there, and I'd like to see what my two colleagues here have to say about all that stuff.
Oh. So I think absolutely spot on. I mean, she's been an active pioneer and pusher in this space for many, many decades. It's like
pusher,
But the work that she's been doing over the past over a decade or so in driving the agenda has been very meaningful and beneficial for organizations who don't know what to do. Where do you start? Because everybody wants to do the same. Everybody wants to get to that point, but sometimes you just don't know where to start. So one is either go and find somebody like Fern. There are many organizations like that. Or find people who are truly passionate in your organization, who believe in the agenda, who believe that this is doable. They don't have to come from HR. It can be IT, it can be the business, it can be compliance, risk. You will find somebody in your company who has this strong belief and passion of doing something bigger than themselves. These are the people that we actually bring them up and let them lead these organizations. And you'll be surprised how they actually shift and change the narrative, because you've given them a safe space to play. But from a society level, like I got 2 kids. The reason I do this is to let them have a better world than I had. So I do not want them to go through what I went through. So when I have that purpose, whatever I'm doing is just for them. Suddenly your mind shifts differently. That you're driving towards a different passion. While you think that you're changing the world, I'm changing the world for them. So that is from an individual standpoint that I believe.
I'll let Fern to finish the society one. I think she has a lot to say.
Oh God, yeah, I do have a lot to say. I think today, you can see that we live in a very polarized world. There's culture wars, there's a lot of things happening, identity politics, etc. Even in Hong Kong, we see it playing out. So that's why I think we need to focus not on differences, but on what's common amongst all of us. We all, I think within our own spheres of influence, we can do something. We actually have the ability, whether it's, like through conversations like this, through social media, through our companies, through our friends, there's a lot that can be done. But, and I think it's important to, to really maintain, a perspective, not just yourself and your world, but, really think about, okay, what's happening in the world? You see all these things, like if you just take race, for example, I do believe there's been an increase in racism, xenophobia. You look at issues like white supremacy, it is prevalent and becoming much more visible. It's no longer in the background. And you see, say, just in this week, you've seen like racially motivated hate crimes. And during the last few years of the pandemic, you saw Asian hate crimes and so on. So there's a lot happening. And I think we need to question, why is it? And, what we can do ourselves to, I don't know, eliminate it, to call it out, do, whatever we can. If we're able to run for office or, be, in government or whatever, and use our positions of privilege and power for the greater good, I think that would be great. So I think everybody needs to play a role.
I'll just add a short part. I think some people think that DEI, diversity and inclusion, is a Western concept and might not apply to Asia. I think some people have certain perception. I think DEI definitely have a longer history in maybe US or Europe for this discussion, but it's definitely not unique to those regions. I think in Hong Kong and Asia, we have a different dynamics. And for example, some of the companies that work with me, they want to discuss racism, Black Lives Matter in Asia, and that will take the society context is different. Hong Kong, like, and Sudesh can speak on that, how does being an ethnic minority like in Hong Kong, and how can we, in Hong Kong, in the recent months, there has been, like, for example, a case of like accused racism in a TV drama about a Chinese lady dressing up as a Filipino. So I think those, to understand DEI in the different contexts, whether you're in UK and Hong Kong, at a society level, that's also important. And because each region have the unique DEI challenges.
Yeah, the cultural lens is really important in the DEI context. And actually DEI and culture, I think, are completely linked, whether that's organizational level, individual level, and society level. So yeah, we have a lot of work to do. Thank you for sharing all these thoughts. This is getting to the end of the formal recorded part. So we're going to have the fun conversation part afterwards. Just before we do that and stop the recording, I just want to ask you each very quickly one thing about you. Who are you that you haven't told us yet? Just the one thing.
That's very difficult.
Well, no, I can start off. Okay, so I'm a techie at heart. So I started off my career as a computer programmer. So I have a degree in computer science. So I spent the first 20-something years of my career in sort of that field. And then I started to branch out into other areas. So I'm still like a techie.
So you're a geek.
I'm a geek. I'm definitely like a nerd and a geek.
So
yes.
I didn't share it in today's presentation. So I'm a different type of geek. I study genetics for my master degree. So my master degree is actually, I spent 1 year in Indonesia studying sea cucumber. And using sea cucumber as a model for marine park. So that's very different from the human DEI, but it's a genetic diversity that I studied before.
Very impressive.
I'm an electronics engineer who has acted in a few sitcoms, which is on Netflix.
Wow, I didn't know that.
Amazing. Wow. Well, we have so much we have so much to unpack in the next part, and that will be not recorded. So everyone who's not joining live, you have to join live next time for things like this.
Yeah.
So just to finish off this this part, for anyone watching the recording, thank you so much for taking the time to do so. We have some episodes coming up. You can join us live. We have the 26th of May, which is Thursday next week, an episode about borderline, and it will be run very differently. This time I will actually be sharing a little bit about me and my story. So yeah, flipping the script. The following session is going to be about dyslexia, and we're going to have two entrepreneurs come in and join us and talk about dyslexia, and especially in the context of entrepreneurship. And then on the 30th of June, we're having a question about where is the diversity in diversity and inclusion, because it turns out that 80% of people involved in diversity and inclusion working in the field are white women. So that's going to be really interesting conversation, I think. Don't miss a beat. If you want to follow us on Instagram, Facebook, that's at @BeyondBorders. And you can also subscribe to the newsletter on my website, beyondborders.com. And you can rewatch any episodes like this one and previous ones on the YouTube channel. So that's it for the formal part. Thank you so much for those watching the recording. I will stop it now.